Good morning, I'm Gretchen Hall. It is midweek Wednesday, the 28th day of May, bringing you Morning Matters because your mornings matter. Let's get to the stories that matter today. President Bongbong Marcos dismisses calls for his resignation, declaring that backing down from challenges is not in his nature. He then emphasizes that his call for courtesy resignations is a serious initiative and not just for show. The MMDA observes better traffic discipline following the NCAP implementation. But no letters have been sent to violators yet because all information had to go or undergo manual verification. And the Department of Justice is looking into claims that former presidential spokesperson Harry Roque holds multiple passports under different name variations. But Roque has firmly denied the allegations. Welcome to our program, Morning Matters, where we talk about the issues you need to know for the rest of your day. Now, first on the agenda, President Bongbong Marcos firmly rejected calls for his resignation, asserting that abandoning his post and avoiding challenges is not in his character. Here is the full report.
I will resign?
Yeah, that's what they want.
Ba't ko gagawin nyo? At wala sa ugali ko yung tinatakbuhan ng problema. So, what good will that do?
That was President Bongbong Marcos's clear and direct response to critics, demanding that he step down from office. His statement follows remarks from former Executive Secretary Atty. Vic Rodriguez, who argued that cabinet courtesy resignations are unnecessary because the real issue lies with the president himself. But President Marcos clarified that his call for courtesy resignations was not for show.
We are looking at the problem deeply. You know, siguro by now, you know, I don't do things pang optics. If there is a problem, I like to fix it. So that's what we are doing. So expect us to be doing a rigorous performance review.
While no official cabinet reshuffle has been announced, the president confirmed he had chosen the next chief of the Philippine National Police. The new appointee will replace General Romel Marbil, who is set to retire on June 7.
I would rather not use this forum to announce that. I think I should talk to them first because the official decision has not been made. They should hear whoever it is should hear about it first from me, not
Meanwhile, the president appeared visibly irritated when asked about the upcoming impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte. He said he does not believe this will lead to political chaos.
How many times do I have to say that? I didn't want impeachment. Lahat ng kakampi ko sa Kongreso hindi nag-file ng impeachment complaint. Yung mga nag-file ng impeachment complaint, hindi mo masasabing kaya kong utusan o pagsabihan na ito yung gagawin mo.
Notably, it was his own son, Ilocos Representative Sandro Marcos, who was the first to sign the fourth impeachment complaint against the vice president, which has been submitted to the Senate.
The legislators, the senators, and the House are going to decide on how to handle it. I don't think that they've made any decisions yet in that regard. So let's let it's in there. It's there. It's nasa kanila yan.
Two Chinese Coast Guard vessels shadow Atin Ito's civilian mission as it makes its way toward Pag-asa Island in the West Philippine Sea. Gio Robles with the details.
As expected by Atin Ito, Chinese Coast Guard ships shadowed and challenged the coalition civilian mission to the West Philippine Sea. CCG vessels with bow numbers 33.
We'll get back to that report later on. In the meantime, more traffic violations are being recorded through the No Contact Apprehension Policy, or the NCAP. Here's the full story. We'll take a quick break as we get to those technical difficulties. Don't go away. We'll be back with more stories right after a short break.
Hello, oo.
Hi! Good
Sorry
morning!
yung internet, medyo mahina.
Oo, nasaan ka?
Andito ako sa may hallway nung dun sa labas ng cabin. Naghanap ng wifi.
Hmm, oo, Starlink ba gamit nyo, maritime?
Hindi, ano lang, parang merong, anong tawag dito? Hindi ko alam yung tawag eh. Pero parang basically, something. Parang upgrade lang siya ng normal.
Ah, welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters. As we mentioned, two Chinese Coast Guard vessels shadowed Atin Ito civilian mission as it makes its way toward Pag-asa Island in the West Philippine Sea. And at this point, we have from Kapitan Felix Oca. Reporting to us live, we have Rafaela David of the Atin Ito Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you well and good. How is the situation there at sea?
Hello, Gretchen, at sa ating mga tagapanood ngayong umaga. Magandang umaga. So, ito naman, yung mga youth natin excited, yung mga volunteers natin, kasi later today we will have another musical event at lunch. So, joyful spirit, and of course, merong sense of solidarity kasi may mga kasama tayo na artists, hindi lang na mga Pinoy, pero may mga artists din from neighboring countries na sumama sa atin para mag-perform. Kaya mararamdaman ko talaga yung pagsasama-sama, pag-aakbayan, pagkakabisig pagdating sa issue na to.
Okay, Rafaela, tell us all about the Chinese Coast Guard vessel shadowing the Kapitan Felix Oca. Kailan nagsimula ito? Gaano kalayo mula dun sa jump-off point sa El Nido?
So kahapon around 8 a.m., nagsimulang mag-shadow yung dalawang CCG vessel sa ating ship, no, sa ating mission. That's I think 6 hours after nating magsimula maglayag, mga around 52 nautical miles away from El Nido. So hindi pa tayo gaanong nakakalayo. At 6 hours pa nga lang yung nababiyahe, nagsimula na silang i-shadow yung ating sinasakyang barko. Tapos pagkatapos nun, a few minutes later, nag-radio challenge pa doon sa ating mission. Doon sa radio challenge, narinig namin syempre yung usual nilang sinasabi na ang Pilipinas daw ay walang karapatan na maglayag dito sa ating karagatan at tayo daw ay hindi sumusunod sa batas. Pero klaro naman sa atin at sa global community of nations na kinabibilangan natin na ang hindi sumusunod ay ang China at sila pa yung sumusubok manghara sa atin, bagkus tayo yung may karapatan dito sa West Philippine Sea.
Lapit po nung 52 nautical miles. I mean, kung naaalala ko nung first civilian mission, galing din tayong El Nido, pero parang hindi ganyan ka lapit. Ano ang sinabi ng mga ng Philippine Coast Guard? Ito ba ay karaniwan o talagang kumbaga dahil alam na nila na mangyayari ito, talagang binubuntutan na?
Yes, medyo surprised din kami kasi nung first mission nga ay nag-shadow sila, nagsimulang mag-shadow, hapon pa. Kasi similar yung oras ng pag-alis namin ngayon eh. Pero ngayon, umaga pa lang, paggising namin, ang bumungad sa amin ay yung ano na, yung balita na may nagsha-shadow nga. Ibig sabihin, tipo bang nagbe-breakfast pa yung mga tao, ay ano na, meron ng ganitong pagre-radio challenge at pagsha-shadow. So, ibig sabihin talagang sinalubong tayo paglabas ng ating exclusive economic zone ano at medyo malapit silang nagsimula dito sa ating coast.
Okay. Rafaela, meron bang Chinese Navy kayo na nakita? Kasi naalala ko rin, nung unang sighting natin, kasama doon yung Navy. But this time around, is there a presence of that?
Yes, well, sa ngayon yung Chinese cook pa lang, yung dalawang vessel pa lang na yung nakikita natin. Hindi katulad nung first mission nga na ang bubungad sa atin ay Navy. Tapos this time parang hindi siya gaanong lumalapit, talagang parang nag-escort lang from some distance ano. Although kagabi may mga ilang volunteers tayo na parang merong nakitang parang may nagdo-drone doon sa taas siguro nagkukuha ng information at klaro naman na hindi galing sa amin yung drone. So ang aming haka pero syempre kino-confirm pa na parang merong drone na nagmamasid doon sa ating mission. Posibleng galing sa kanila.
Okay din, ano, kasi at least maybe it seems that they are keeping their distance this time. But how does Atin Ito see this shadowing by the Chinese Coast Guard vessels? And what was the reaction of the people there? Because we have, I think, more civilians on board.
Oo, ano, noong itong ginagawa nila, alam namin that this is an effort na singdakin yung ating mga volunteers at yung ating mga guests on board Kapitan Felix Oca. Pero nakaka-inspire, nakaka-lakas ng loob makita yung ating mga volunteers at even yung mga bisita na imbis na magpasindak ay tuloy lang dun sa kanilang mga ginagawa. In fact, kahapon nga ng afternoon ay nagkaroon pa ng political education session kasama yung ating one of our leaders at advocates sa atin ito, si Kiko D. Nagkaroong, habang nasa likod niya, nagsha-shadow yung Chinese vessel, siya yung nagkakwento ng kasaysayan ng ating paninindigan sa West Philippine Sea. After nun, nagka-jamming session pa kasama yung ating mga artists on board. So, ibig sabihin, kahit na mayroong ganoong effort na manakot yung China, parang ano naman, keeping strong and keeping the courage yung ating mga kasama on board.
Ay, Paeng, the concert is slated to happen tonight. Where do you want to hold that? Sa Pag-asa Island ba mismo? Malapit lamang sa Pag-asa? And ano yung mga nakikitang challenges ni Captain George de la Cruz papuntang Pag-asa? Is he monitoring a fleet of ships that might be a blockade to the Atin Ito mission?
We're hoping to conduct our second musical event sa mission na ito sa still aboard Kapitan Felix Oca, pero hopefully, at ito yung ating intent, mag-concert sa vicinity ng Pag-asa Island. Hopefully within the territorial waters around Pag-asa Island para kung may pagkakataon ay makasalubong natin yung mga mangingisda na nanggaling pa sa Pag-asa Island para makasama natin. At gayon din ay we're hoping na syempre ay walang maging aberya at tuloy-tuloy lang ang ating mission para sa dulo. Mission accomplished ulit tayo this third mission. Pero that being said, we're also prepared na baka may mga ilang nakabantay na doon at sasalubong din sa atin. So sasalubungin tayo ng mga mangingisda from Pag-asa Island pero tayo ay nag-expect din na possibly baka mayroong doong mga Chinese vessels na baka makiki-concert sa atin. Hopefully with peace. Hopefully carrying the message of peace. Pero alam naman natin na sa act nila lately parang talagang ang intent ay manakot.
Okay, Paeng, alam natin yung Pag-asa Island, medyo malayo ito sa Palawan, ano? Nasa may Kalayaan Islands na ito. Itong mga mangingisda na sasalubong sa inyo, saan sila exactly nangingisda? Alam ko kasi parang puro commercial na yung nandyan, no? Kailangan medyo malaki-laki yung bangka mo for you to be able to get there. At pangalawa, nagkokomento yung ibang mga tao, no, online, nagtatanong, bakit concert? Paano ito makakatulong sa advokasya para sa West Philippine Sea?
So yung mga mangingisda doon, yung ilan ay, may ilan actually na natirang mga fishing boats doon sa Pag-asa Island. At yung ilan may mga galing din siguro Mindoro na pumapadpad doon sa area na yon. Tapos, bakit mahalagang ginagawa natin ito? This is very much important kasi especially this historic peaceful concert at sea, ang ating panawagan ay, ang ating gustong ipakita ay through using music as an instrument, ay maipakita natin na sa mapayapang paraan pwede tayong tumindig. And also through music, we are creating bridges among nations. Kasi iba-iba yung lengguwahe natin eh. Pero pagdating sa musika, that we can share, we can build bridges among nations who believe in peace and who believe in the international rules-based order. So itong klaseng ganitong concert para sa atin ay isang love song para sa West Philippine Sea at gayon din sa lahat ng tumitindig para sa ating karapatan.
Is it safe to say lahat ng nandyan ay naninindigan, no, para sa kapayapaan sa West Philippine Sea? Kahit na yung mga foreign artist, naiintindihan ba nila kung ano yung cause dyan, yung ipinaglalaban?
Nakakatuwa actually kasi even yung mga artists, especially kahapon nung nagja-jamming session kami with them, ay yung klaro sa kanila na ibang man yung ating mga pinanggaligang bansa, meron tayong unity pagdating sa mensahe ng kapayapaan. At para sa kanila ay wala dapat nambubuli sa ating neighborhood. Dapat tayo magkakapitbahay ay nagtutulungan, magkakapitbisig at obligasyon nating lahat na panatilihin yung kapayapaan dito sa ating rehiyon. At nakakatuwa kasi yung jamming session nga, makikita mo na o-observe din nila yung shadowing dun sa likuran nila habang sila ay kumakanta. Kaya doon pa lang kitang-kita mo na yung sense of solidarity,
Nararamdaman,
yung
oo,
pakikipagkaisa nila sa issue ng ating
Gusto ko
bitbit.
lang din tanongin, nakakahabol ko lang si Kapitan George de la Cruz, kung matatandaan mo, no, first mission, nag-U-turn. Wala na bang U-turn ngayon? At kamusta naman siya sa kanyang paghahanda dito para bilang isang leader ng buong trip, ng buong mission?
Oo. Sa palagay ko, in the first mission and second mission, marami tayong natutunang mga lessons at kasama doon yung pag-i-ensure na we are prepared doon sa lahat ng mga scenarios na pwede nating harapin at kasama dyan yung coordination din natin doon sa captain of the vessel kasi sa dulo siya ang pinaka-bossing at siya ang pinaka-driver dito sa ating barko. And we're just happy na talagang this time ay clear sa amin yung objectives and we're hoping na, kasi ang bitbit naman namin ay musika, we're hoping to successfully conduct our peaceful concert sa vicinity ng Pag-asa Island. Ano man yung gawin ng China, hindi tayo papasindak at tuloy lang tayo na parating yung musika sa mga gusto nating makarinig nito.
Saan mapapanood ang concert? Online for those who want to tune in? And at what time?
Yes, magkakaroon po tayo ng concert mamaya around lunchtime. So abangan po nila, baka sa lunch break nila pwede silang maki-jamming sa atin. Pwedeng panoorin sa ating Facebook page doon sa Atin Ito at doon sa ilang mga partner organizations natin naka-share din ng live natin ng concert. So yung pages halimbawa ng Akbayan Party, ng Student Council Alliance of the Philippines, pwede po nilang i-monitor para makapanood din sila at makasama sa ating kantahan.
Okay, lahat kami ay will stay tuned to that. The lunchtime concert by the Atin Ito Coalition, the third mission, civilian mission involving artists and, of course, advocates for the West Philippine Sea. It is good to see you in this mood. Kalmado ka lang, ano? And we hope it stays that way. Thank you so much for your time today. We have Rafaela David of the Atin Ito Coalition. Please do stay safe. Don't go away. We'll be back with more stories right after a quick break. On here on Morning Matters, we talk about the most pressing issues and give you the context behind the headlines. President Bongbong Marcos has called on fellow ASEAN member states to fast-track the adoption of a legally binding code of conduct in the South China Sea. Marcos made the appeal during his intervention at the 46th ASEAN plenary session in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He emphasized that a binding code of conduct is crucial to safeguarding maritime rights, promoting regional stability, and preventing miscalculations at sea. In April, ASEAN and China agreed to complete a code of conduct by 2026. Let's get some insights from Sea Light Director and retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Ray Powell. He joins us this morning on Morning Matters. So welcome to the show.
Hi, Gretchen. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Let's begin first before we talk about the Code of Conduct. I wanted to know what Sea Light is seeing out in the West Philippine Sea as the Atin Ito Coalition makes its way to Pag-asa. I remember in the first mission, you alerted a possible blockade by Chinese ships. How about this time?
Well, I see a good gathering of Chinese ships near Pag-asa, including at least one Chinese Coast Guard and several maritime militia. I'm guessing there are more that are not visible on the automatic information system. The ship that Rafaela David was talking about shadowing them, I'm guessing that was 21549, which was hanging out near El Nido. It has also been dark, so I haven't been able to see it recently, but I'm assuming it's the same ship.
It's probably is it relatively peaceful? Is it safe to say that? I mean, compared to the past encounters with a Chinese Navy ship not in sight and just two CCG vessels?
Honestly, China may be starting to learn some lessons about how not to do these things. I mean, their blockade, as I called it in last year, when the fishing vessels went out to Scarborough Shoal, Bahadim Masanok, was a little over the top. And yes, I did refer to it as a blockade, and I was roundly criticized by Chinese state media for that. But I call them like I see them. But I don't see anything quite like that yet this time, and maybe they're learning.
It's a hopefully peaceful voyage ahead. Let's go to the code of conduct that President Marcos has called for in the ASEAN summit. He said that he wants a legally binding code of conduct. The call for it being legally binding, would that be the main difference from the 2002 Declaration of Conduct?
Yeah, that really is the sticking point, right? So the problem with DOC, as we call it, the 2002 DOC, is that China has systematically violated most of it, and there is nobody to, there's no sheriff to go put the perpetrator in jail. So, and the problem going forward is, who would that sheriff be? What would it be? Some kind of committee, or agreed upon? But China's not going to agree to that. They just have too much invested in their current status as being, frankly, the sole arbiter of what's right and wrong across the entire South China Sea.
I remember listening to you on StoryCon with Reg and Ed, and you said that somehow China has not violated some provisions in the DOC. What was that again?
So, I mean, okay, so for example, China routinely denies freedom of navigation to the Philippines. Even that last Atin Ito mission, most of the vessels had to stop 50 nautical miles or more short of Scarborough Shoal. There's no reason to do that except for the denial of freedom of navigation. Even if we were to yield China's point that they believe they own Scarborough Shoal, that would still only gain a 12 nautical mile territorial sea, but they are enforcing it out 50 nautical miles. So that is legally, that is illegal under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and under the DOC. DOC, one of their declarations is that the parties reaffirm their respect for and commitment to the freedom of navigation, blah, 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 all the way through, and specifically invokes the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and they violate that. They violate the one that says that they will, that the parties will exercise self-restraint. Well, I'm sorry, but ramming and water cannoning are not self-restraint. So these are the things they routinely violated, and then they nitpick little things that the Philippines does, and will say those are the violations. For example, trying to bring construction materials to the BRP Sierra Madre at Ayungin Shoal. They'll say, well, that's a violation because they say it is, right?
Correct. And I remember now what you mentioned. They haven't been able, or they have not built permanent structures on uninhabited islands. Is that something that they continuously adhere to? And why do you think that's a strategy of China? Why haven't they violated that specific provision?
Well, I think what they're hoping is that by sort of not doing that, that they will be able to sort of keep some semblance of moral high ground for that specific thing. So that will keep Vietnam and Malaysia and the Philippines from making additional structures on currently uninhabited features. But what they do allow themselves to do under the DOC is to take very, very minimal habitations and turn them into massive military ports and airfields on these artificial islands that they created. So they basically took the loopholes that they saw in the DOC and drove a very, very large ship through them.
And they do invoke the DOC at times when it is convenient. In particular, in a position paper on the South China Sea arbitration, China argued that the DOC is a legally binding agreement, and it said that the Philippines is violating it and is barred from seeking legal recourse through arbitration because it is bound by paragraph 4 to settle disputes only through friendly consultations and negotiations. I mean, did the Philippines somehow also violate paragraph 4?
I would say, certainly, but it also says, if you continue the sentence all the way to the end, in accordance with universally recognized principles of international law, including the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which allows for arbitration. So, I would say no, the Philippines did not. Obviously, the China, as they tends to take sort of selectively read these things and say, well, this part in particular applies to the Philippines, while all of these other things that are happening do not apply to China.
Of course, as we go back to the first point, the legally binding part being the sticking point of this call by the president, I guess several questions are at the heart of that. In particular, who will be the legal authority for that? And isn't that the same as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea? If that is already a legally binding agreement between states and nations to be able to respect maritime rights, wouldn't a code of conduct somehow be the same?
Well, so in the perfect world, a code of conduct would have a, and again, an enforcer, a binder, if you will, who would, very much stick to the terms of international law as established under the UNCLOS and others. That's why I remain a code of conduct pessimist. I actually believe there will never be a code of conduct because, frankly, anything that China would sign would almost certainly be a very bad deal for the other claimant countries, including the Philippines, because what China would then do is say, this new code of conduct we have supersedes the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea because the relevant parties have agreed to this, and so we can set aside all of those UNCLOS arbitration kinds of things that they do. So that's, again, I think that China will continue to drag out these negotiations. They'll refer all disputes to the code of conduct negotiations with the intent of never actually resolving them.
Is that the reason why you mentioned that a code of conduct is not possible if it is done in bad faith? Does that also explain the change in tone of China on this code of conduct? They have expressed interest in achieving that because somehow they have already asserted or they have de facto control over several maritime features. For example, like Scarborough Shoal or over in Sandy Cay.
Well, right. So, and this goes back to your point about them sort of wagging their finger at the Philippines for going to arbitration. What China uses the Code of Conduct negotiations for is another stick to bludgeon the other countries with. So by going to arbitration, the Philippines is saying, look, China is already operating in bad faith. They're already denying us freedom of navigation. They're already being escalatory. They're already, using these tactics, which are clearly, coercive, use of force, all of these things. And yet they want to sort of control the discussion of how, the future code of conduct goes. Where the Philippines, frankly, the Philippines' best option is to go to international law, and as they have in the past, and as they may again in the future, because they don't want to submit to a Chinese-dominated body that they perceive as, as a potential outcome on a code of conduct.
But the UNCLOS cannot decide on territorial issues. So what is the best way forward here for the Philippines?
Yeah, so that would have to go to different bodies, right? So other international bodies. So one, some that have been suggested. In fact, my colleague in Washington D.C., Greg Polling, has suggested that the UN General Assembly would almost certainly vote with the Philippines on if issues were brought to them. Now, in terms of resolving things like who owns Scarborough Shoal. That may be a harder lift than most, because it's there's such a long contest over it. Now it may be possible, and I don't see China winning that fight, but I'm not sure I see the Philippines winning it either. It may be one of those things that just kind of ends up in a hung jury.
How do you imagine, I know you're a code of conduct pessimist, but how do you imagine an ideal COC amongst ASEAN countries to go, given the characteristics of the region? Comparing it to the EU, for example, they are highly legalistic in terms of their structure, but when it comes to ASEAN agreements and treaties, they are at many times informal and ambiguous when it comes to its being legally binding. How do you imagine an effective COC to be?
Honestly, under the current political environment, I don't imagine an effective COC, even if it was just among ASEAN states, because many of the ASEAN states, I think, would be very heavily pressured by Beijing not to sign up to anything that the claimant states would be interested in. So, the land, say that the Laoses and Cambodias of the world who don't have a direct stake in the South China Sea fight would be leaned on by Beijing to sort of back away and not sign up to things that would annoy Beijing. So I think you're probably, I honestly just don't see a future. I think that you'd have to go more minilateral, and frankly, you'd have to continue to invite in outside parties, which is exactly what China wants to stop. They want to have the EU and the United States and others just to stay out.
Help us to understand why it is more difficult for us to get support in this side of the world as compared to outside. Is it because of
a lot of it just has to do
yeah.
with the fact that China is so much larger than the countries that immediately surround it, and so it is able to put immense amounts of pressure on those countries, and so they're just making business decisions, as we would say, right? They have extremely robust trade and economic relationships with China, and they don't see it as being in their national interest to support the Philippines.
Away from the ASEAN-China agreement, is it possible for us to get alliances with countries that have also been intimidated and threatened by China, like Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia? Do you see that as a viable option?
I think that it's going to be issue by issue, and now it may be down the road. See, part of the problem we've seen from especially the countries along that southern tier, Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia, they have just kind of hoped that that these kinds of things would pass them by. So they see the Philippines and Vietnam having a lot more trouble than they are. And of course, the Philippines and Vietnam are a lot closer to mainland China than they are. And so they have preferred largely to keep their heads down and maybe just hope that eventually China doesn't turn their way. I think that's a foolish hope. I don't see any indication that China is going to give up on its ambitions to control its entire dash line claim all the way down to those countries' coastlines. But right now, it's just not as acute a problem for them as it is for the Philippines and for Vietnam.
If it isn't the code of conduct, which the government is pushing by 2026, and a UN General Assembly would be far-fetched, what would be a better direction for the government to take here? How about improvements to the current DOC? What would be your suggestion then for this administration in light of the escalations over at Sandy Cay, over at Bajo de Masinloc, and the regularity of that harassment? They are going or inching closer and closer to Philippine shores.
As I've said, and of course you just had Rafaela David on, and what they are doing through Atin Ito and efforts like that, and also just through the Philippines Transparency Initiatives, is alerting the international community. And the Philippines has been gaining a lot of support internationally for its position. So by continuing to strengthen its legal positions, the Philippines is setting up for a long-term fight, right? So when I think of what Atin Ito is doing, I think of it in terms of nonviolent direct action. This is the kinds of campaigns carried out by Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King against oppressor states, whether it be the Jim Crow South in the United States or the British Empire with India. And those campaigns took a very long time, but they were ultimately successful, and they were ultimately successful because the larger community around them were convinced that they were in the right and the oppressors were in the wrong. And but it doesn't happen instantly. It can be very unsatisfying in the short term. The Filipinos are experiencing water cannons on the water. Well, in Mississippi, they experienced water cannons on land, right? They got water cannon by the police forces in those states. And that happens on one of these long campaigns to be able to push out an imperialist power. And so I think that's what the Philippines is looking ahead to, is rather than trying to find the silver bullet that solves this, whether it be a code of conduct or some kind of UN General Assembly resolution that China will ignore. It will, ultimately it's going to be China getting tired of this, right? So China making a decision in the future, maybe post Xi Jinping or whatever, and saying this just isn't worth it.
And maybe wait for political and economic headwinds that could help our situation. As you mentioned, maybe the nonviolent protests will make its mark out on our seas. And so if they are regularizing their Coast Guard ships and Navy ships, we should regularize our civilian missions.
And build capacity, which is also what you're doing. You're bringing in additional Coast Guard ships, more Navy ships, larger Coast Guard ships. All of those things are important to do, because in the future, what you want is for Beijing to look and say, we've got enough problems in other places. Why are we making problems over this?
All right, thank you so much for putting that into context for us. We have Sea Light Director and retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Ray Powell talking to us about the latest in the West Philippine Sea. Stay tuned, Morning Matters will be back right after a short break. Welcome back. You're still with us here on Morning Matters on One News. The International Criminal Court has rejected former President Rodrigo Duterte's bid to disqualify judges handling the investigation into his deadly drug war. The ICC prosecutor's office dismissed the move as baseless, saying Duterte's legal team failed to prove any bias or conflict of interest. The request aimed to remove key judges from the probe into alleged crimes against humanity during his administration's anti-drug campaign. Duterte remains in detention at The Hague as the investigation continues. Let's discuss that development further with ICC Accredited Counsel and Central Law Philippines Executive Director Attorney Gilbert Andres. Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Morning, Gretchen, and good morning to your televiewers.
I may ask if you are still reporting to us live from The Hague.
Yes, live from The Hague. It's 2:46 a.m.
Thank you so much for being with us. Una-unang tanong ko, kamusta naman yung atmosphere dyan? The last I talked to you in person was outside the ICC headquarters. Mainit pa yung tension doon. Pero sa ngayon, meron pa rin ba mga protest rally na nagaganap dyan sa Hague?
Well, there's some gatherings by our fellow Filipinos. So I think it's still ongoing.
Pero hindi na kasing init noon. Kasi naging tourist site na yung yung penitentiary.
As to whether mainit siya, I don't really know, Gretchen, because I actually don't go nearby.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's go to the response of the ICC prosecution to the request of the defense to disqualify the two judges. Doesn't it make sense also if they had already ruled on this back in 2021 that the Philippines has jurisdiction, or the ICC has jurisdiction over the Philippines in terms of this case for the time period that is being investigated, that they inhibit from another case on jurisdiction? What would you say to that?
Actually, it's not a ground for disqualification because, in fact, that is provided for by the Rome Statute. Under Article 15 of the Rome Statute, the judges can actually make a preliminary determination as to jurisdiction. That's why the judges made that preliminary jurisdiction. But that preliminary determination is without prejudice to a subsequent challenge. So that is actually authorized by the Rome Statute, and it's not really a ground for their disqualification.
Kasi dito yung ina-argue ng prosecution ay 2 taon daw ang tinagal, no? Bago nasimulan yung investigasyon, at sinasabi dapat within 1 year. Hindi ba parang we're going back to square one by invoking that? How does it work in the ICC?
Actually, that's really the challenge, you know, if there's a request for recusal or disqualification. You know. In fact, it was argued by the prosecutor in the comment given by the Office of the Prosecutor that if we will actually use the interpretation by the defense, then it will give a absurd result. You know, wherein if a judge gives a initial determination on an issue of law, that a judge will actually just be recused from a subsequent determination on the same legal issue, when in fact that's part of judicial duty to actually determine legal issues. Actually, Gretchen, when it comes to disqualification, it really is with respect to factual issues. So if that judge made a factual determination before or was actually related to the case in another capacity aside from being a judge, that's really the ground for disqualification. But in this case, there's really no legal basis for asking for the disqualification.
We know that you represent the victims, but what is your official role there now? Have you been recognized by the ICC? We know that there was a petition to have the victims represented by one body, by the OPCV. Meron na bang response yung ICC doon?
Ano kasi, Gretchen, hindi pa na-start yung process for the recognition of the common legal representatives for victims. So that procedure will go on later on pa, not at this period. So antabayanan pa natin yung ang official process na yun for common legal representatives.
But if ever, what will you be appealing for? What is the ideal setup?
Well, as of this moment, there's actually a move to take the views of the victims as to what will be the characteristics of the common legal representative for victims that they want to be appointed. And I think siguro yung isang view dyan, dahil nga nandun na nga sa dahig yung paglilitis at yung mga abogado doon ay mga foreigners, hindi po sila mga Pilipino, siguro mas maganda na yung i-appoint din ay mga Pilipino din para mas madaling makaintindi at madali po silang makapag-ugnayan po sa mga biktima. So yun po yung mga views po na ginagather po ngayon.
So if ever there will be a lead Filipino lawyer to represent, that would be ideal?
Well, we hope so, para magkaroon din naman ng connection sa Philippine community at para din maunawaan ng ating mga kababayan ng mga naging biktima kung ano po talaga yung proseso. Kasi talagang malaking challenge din yung language barrier. Malaking challenge na nga yung technical issue kasi highly technical nga yung mga issues before the ICC. Tapos mas mapapadali po siya kung isang Pilipino po nakakaintindi po ng wika ng mga victims ang ma-appoint po. At yan po yung ating hope.
Oo, pero malamang isa lang. I mean, kasi yung request na yon to have one legal representative stems from ang daming lawyer, no? Nitong mga victims and witnesses. Pero eventually, that will be trimmed down to a team. Is that correct?
Siguro yung magandang isipin, isang team lang. At yung
Oo.
isang team na yon, pwedeng nabubuo siya ng isang lead counsel, tapos meron ding assistant counsel, meron ding case
okay.
manager, at kung a-appoint, meron ding lead investigator. So yun po yung goal, magkaroon po ng isang team para po sa mga lahat ng victim.
Okay. The ICC Pretrial Chamber 1 has granted the request to extend the deadline for the disclosure of witnesses and submission of documents in relation to that. What does that mean for the victims? Meron bang mga takot itong mga biktima na ipinapahayag sa inyo when it comes to that disclosure? Kamusta na sila ngayon?
Actually, that's always a constant concern at fear ng ating mga client na victims, na magkaroon po ng intimidation or magkaroon po ng talagang coercive environment around them. Kaya that's always been the presumption. Kaya talagang iba yung pag-iingat lang. At we're hoping na talagang this will be a secure environment para po sa mga victims.
Pero attorney, meron na bang mga maglalakas loob na humarap sa dating presidente? Paano gagawin yung paglilitis na yan? I mean, na-witness natin itong pagbabasa sa kanya ng mga charges. Pero when it comes to the actual case, yung paglilitis, do we expect that to be viewed to the public?
So yung trial sa September 20, it's a public trial. Any ICC proceedings, any hearing will be public. And then actually when it comes to the victims, so hindi po sila necessarily kailangan pong pumunta doon. Kaya nga po mayroon po silang common legal representative for victims. Maganda nga kung mayroong makapunta pong isang victim na mag-represent. So, yung kanilang pong common legal representative, yung mag-represent po sa kanila. Tapos, ang talagang magiging goal po ng confirmation of charges is to show na talagang dapat po siyang mag-proceed to trial. Yan po magiging goal ng Office of the Prosecutor. So, magpe-present po ng evidence. At usually, Gretchen, it's very rare talaga na may in-person na witness na i-represent. Although the prosecutor already disclosed na there will be at most 2 in-person witnesses. At as to who are those 2 in-person witnesses, antabayan po natin kasi hindi po natin alam as of the moment.
Alright. Maraming salamat for the updates from The Hague. And thank you so much for staying up for us, for those. We have Attorney Gilbert Andres representing the victims, of course, in the trial or the case against the former president in the International Criminal Court. Maraming salamat. Meanwhile, more traffic violations are being recorded through the No Contact Apprehension Policy, or NCAP. Here is that report.
It looked like there was a motorcade along Commonwealth Avenue in Quezon City on Tuesday morning. No one was swerving, and even if traffic slow, drivers stayed on their lanes, especially the motorcycle riders. Even cars did not dare cross the lane that was intended for motorcycles. Motorists are more cautious than ever. That's because disregarding traffic signs comes with a 1,000 peso fine. Now that the no-contact apprehension policy is back, at least along EDSA, a mere CCTV footage could hold you liable. On day 1 of NCAP's implementation, May 26, MMDA recorded more than 1,000 traffic violators. But no letters have been sent to violators yet because all information had to undergo manual verification.
Pag na-validate, dadaan na naman po siya sa another approval, isang supervisor to see kung tama ang citation na nilagay and corresponding penalty. After that, tsaka lang po pipirmahan at ipapadala yung notice of violation.
The MMDA is also planning to procure additional cameras with artificial intelligence capability for the NCAP.
Para po mas malawak na yung range kasi there are still some areas na wala ho pang CCTV at hindi pa ma-monitor. So doon po namin i-augment yung mga traffic enforcers namin.
The NCAP, of course, is just one scheme in force ahead of the EDSA rehabilitation project. But in an interview with A Big Story, Transportation Secretary Vince Dizon said the rehabilitation of EDSA alone will not solve Metro Manila's traffic woes. He stressed that improving mass transportation remains the long-term solution.
We never said that the EDSA rebuild will solve traffic and will magically remove traffic from EDSA. That's not what we're saying, no? And because that's just not true. What will solve traffic is when we finish the subway, when we finish all the other mass transport systems.
Dizon vowed to order the deployment of more buses and trains during the EDSA rehabilitation.
Right now, the maximum capacity that we feel the busway can accommodate, especially with the rebuild, of roughly about 550 buses. So right now we are at 400. We aim to add 150 more para umabot po tayo ng 550.
The Metro Pacific Tollways Corporation, or MPTC, is open to waiving toll fees on parts of its expressway network to help ease traffic during the rehabilitation of EDSA. This comes after the Department of Transportation confirmed that San Miguel Corporation will provide toll-free access on certain segments of Skyway Stage 3 as part of its efforts to support motorists affected by the roadworks. MPTC Chairman Manuel V. Pangilinan said the company may implement a similar initiative via the NLEX connector, an 8-kilometer elevated expressway linking Caloocan and Santa Mesa in Manila. Pangilinan emphasized the importance of complementing government efforts and noted that MPTC is currently in discussions with its tollway operators to determine the feasibility of such a measure. And that's it for our Wednesday. That wraps up today's episode of Morning Matters. We hope we've given you the right start to your morning. Let's go ahead and make the day matter. My name is Gretchen Ho, your One News, all sides, all the time.